Black CEO had wine poured over her by Billionaire's sister, then she shut down their $2.4 billion contract. The crystal chandelier above the platinum ballroom cast rainbow fragments across the marble floor when Victoria Blackwell walked in wearing a golden dress that caught the light like captured sunshine. She had no idea that within the hour, her story would become Black CEO had wine poured over her by Billionaire's sister, then she shut down their $2.4 billion contract, a tale that would echo through corporate boardrooms for years to come. The annual Prosperity Gala was where deals worth billions were celebrated, where the ultra-wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves on their success, where old money met new innovation. Victoria had earned her invitation through blood, sweat, and 16-hour workdays that started when she was 17 years old, building her technology empire from a garage startup to a company worth $8 billion. She walked with the confidence of someone who had fought for every step, her head high, her shoulders back, completely unaware that across the room, someone was already planning her humiliation. Patricia Whitmore watched Victoria enter from her perch near the champagne fountain, her fingers tightening around her glass until her knuckles turned white. Patricia was 28 years old, born into wealth so vast she had never needed to check a price tag in her life. Her brother Christopher ran Whitmore Industries, the family empire built on shipping and logistics that their great-grandfather had started with a single boat. Just that morning, Christopher had signed the biggest deal in the company's 100-year history, a partnership with Blackwell Technologies that would revolutionize global supply chains using artificial intelligence. Patricia had begged him not to do it. She had warned him about letting those people into their inner circle. She had raged when he ignored her, when he told her that Victoria Blackwell was the future while she was stuck in the past. Now, watching Victoria glide through the room like she belonged there, Patricia felt poison spreading through her veins. The woman was beautiful, confident, brilliant, everything Patricia secretly feared she herself would never be. And worse, she was black, succeeding in spaces Patricia believed should belong only to people like her own family. The champagne in her glass suddenly felt like a weapon waiting to be used. Victoria found her assigned seat at the head table, right next to where the Whitmore family would sit. The placement was deliberate, a symbol of the new partnership, the merging of old wealth and new innovation. She smoothed her golden dress and smiled at the other guests already seated, executives and investors she had known for years, people who had watched her climb from nothing to everything. They smiled back, some genuine, others forced, because Victoria's success made some people uncomfortable in ways they would never admit out loud. She pulled out her phone to check one last message from her team, confirming that the announcement of the partnership would go live at midnight, synchronized with markets opening in Tokyo. Everything was perfect, aligned like stars forming a constellation of success. She had worked 20 years for this moment, sacrificed relationships, missed family gatherings, poured her soul into building something that mattered. Tonight was supposed to be her triumph, the night she proved that a black woman from the wrong side of Chicago could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone in this room. The orchestra began playing a waltz, the notes floating through the air like butterflies made of sound. More guests arrived, filling the ballroom with the rustle of silk and the sparkle of diamonds. Patricia made her way toward the head table, stopping to air-kiss acquaintances and laugh at jokes she didn't really hear. Her mind was focused on one thing only, the woman in gold. Who dared to sit where Patricia believed she didn't belong? With each step, Patricia's plan crystallized, sharp and cruel as winter ice. She had brought a special bottle of wine from the family cellar, a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem worth more than most people's cars. She had told the servers it was for a toast, for the celebration of the partnership. But Patricia had very different plans for that golden liquid. She reached the table just as her brother Christopher arrived, his face bright with the satisfaction of a deal well done. He kissed Patricia's cheek, then turned to Victoria with genuine warmth. "Victoria, I'd like you to meet my sister Patricia. Patricia, this is Victoria Blackwell, the genius who's going to transform our entire operation." Victoria stood, extending her hand with a professional smile that had charmed CEOs and presidents alike. "Patricia, what a pleasure. Christopher speaks so highly of you." Patricia looked at the extended hand like it was something diseased. She didn't take it. Instead, she let her eyes travel slowly from Victoria's shoes to her face, a deliberate, insulting inspection. "Yes, I'm sure he does," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Christopher has always been fascinated by unusual things." The words hung in the air like a slap. Christopher's face darkened, but Victoria's smile never wavered. She had heard worse, faced worse, survived worse. She simply lowered her hand and sat back down, refusing to let this spoiled child ruin her moment. Patricia's face flushed with anger at being dismissed so easily. She had expected tears, anger, some reaction she could mock. This calm dignity was not in her script. She gripped the bottle of wine tighter, her plan shifting from cruel to vicious. The dinner began with the usual speeches and toasts, powerful people congratulating themselves while servers moved silently between tables like ghosts carrying plates of food that cost more than minimum wage workers made in a week. Victoria listened politely, applauded when appropriate, all while feeling Patricia's eyes burning into her from across the table. She knew this feeling, had experienced it 100 times before in 100 different boardrooms. The feeling of being watched by someone who hated her not for what she had done but for what she represented. Change. Progress. The end of old hierarchies that had kept people like Patricia at the top simply by virtue of their birth. Victoria had learned long ago not to let that hatred touch her. She had built her armor from years of being the only black woman in the room, the only one who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Tonight was her victory, and no amount of nasty looks could take that away from her. Christopher stood to make the official announcement, his voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate not just a partnership but a revolution. Whitmore Industries and Blackwell Technologies are joining forces in a deal worth $2.4 billion that will reshape global commerce." Applause erupted across the room, cameras flashed, and Victoria stood to acknowledge the moment. This was it, the pinnacle of everything she had worked for. Patricia watched her brother and this woman stand side by side, accepting congratulations, and something inside her snapped like a rope pulled too tight. She grabbed the bottle of wine and stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the applause like a knife through silk. "I'd like to propose a toast," Patricia announced, her voice high and sharp. The room quieted, curious. She walked around the table toward Victoria, the bottle held high like a torch. "To Victoria Blackwell," Patricia said, her smile so false it could have been painted on. "Who has somehow convinced my brother that she belongs at this table. Who thinks that money can buy class, that success can erase what you really are." The room grew uncomfortable, whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. Christopher stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Patricia, that's enough." But Patricia wasn't listening. She was standing directly behind Victoria now, the bottle poised above her head. "You know what? You're right. Let me give you something that actually suits you." And then, with deliberate, cruel precision, she began to pour. The wine fell like liquid gold, splashing onto Victoria's carefully styled hair, running down her face, her neck, soaking into the golden dress that had cost her 3 months of savings 10 years ago when she bought it for her first major presentation, keeping it all these years as a reminder of how far she had come. The ballroom exploded into chaos. Gasps, shouts, the crash of glasses being set down too hard. Phones appeared like magic, everyone desperate to capture the scandal. The wine kept coming, Patricia emptying the entire bottle, $20,000 of vintage wine used as a weapon of humiliation. It pooled on the floor, stained the white tablecloth, destroyed everything it touched. Victoria didn't move. She didn't cry out, didn't jump up, didn't give Patricia the satisfaction of any reaction at all. She sat perfectly still as wine dripped from her chin onto her lap, as her dress became a canvas of ruin, as cameras captured what was supposed to be her humiliation. The silence that followed when the bottle was finally empty was deafening. Patricia stood there, breathing hard, the empty bottle still in her hand, waiting for Victoria to break, to scream, to run from the room in tears. But Victoria did something no one expected. She reached for her napkin with steady hands and carefully wiped her face. Then she stood, wine still dripping from her dress, and turned to face Patricia with eyes that held no anger, no hurt, only a terrifying calm. "Thank you," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "You've just made this very easy for me." She pulled out her phone, never breaking eye contact with Patricia, and hit a single number on her speed dial. The call connected immediately. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Kill the deal. All of it. Immediately." The reaction was instant and explosive. Christopher lunged forward, his face white with shock. "Victoria, wait, please. Let's discuss this." But Victoria held up one finger, still on the phone. "Yes, I'm certain. Execute the termination clause. Full withdrawal. And Marcus? Make sure the press release goes out in exactly 5 minutes." She ended the call and placed her phone carefully on the table, next to the puddle of wine that was still spreading across the white linen. The ballroom erupted. People were shouting, phones were ringing, Christopher was grabbing Patricia's arm, demanding to know what she had done. But Victoria heard none of it. She was looking at Patricia, really looking at her, seeing the fear that was beginning to replace the smug satisfaction. "Your family's company just lost $2.4 billion, Victoria said quietly, but her voice somehow cut through all the noise. "Your brother worked for 2 years to make this deal happen. It was going to save your company from the debt your father hid before he died." "Oh yes, I know about that. I know about the loans coming due next month that you can't pay without my technology. I know everything, because that's what due diligence means." Patricia's face had gone from red to white. The empty bottle slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You thought you were humiliating me, but all you did was show everyone in this room exactly who you are. A small, frightened person who thinks cruelty is the same as power. But real power? Real power is building something from nothing. Real power is creating jobs for thousands of people. Real power is walking away from $2.4 billion because my dignity is worth more than any amount of money you could offer." The room was dead silent now, everyone hanging on every word. Christopher had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, watching his family's empire crumble in real time. Patricia stood frozen, wine pooling around her designer shoes, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to do anything but watch as the woman she had tried to destroy stood taller than anyone in the room. "I want everyone here to remember this moment," Victoria said, addressing the entire ballroom now. "Remember what you saw. Remember who laughed. Remember who stayed silent. Because tomorrow, when the markets open, when the news breaks, when your phones start ringing with panicked calls from investors, I want you to remember that this is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, when you think that the color of someone's skin determines their worth." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I built my company from nothing. I can walk away from this deal and survive. Can you say the same?" She looked directly at Christopher, who couldn't meet her eyes. "Your sister just cost you everything your family built over a century. I hope it was worth it." Victoria walked toward the exit, each step measured and dignified despite the wine still dripping from her dress. The crowd parted before her like the sea, some in awe, some in fear, all in shock. As she reached the doors, she turned back one last time. Patricia had fallen to her knees, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Christopher was on his phone, desperately trying to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. The entire ballroom looked like a tableau of destruction, frozen in the moment when pride led to downfall. "You know what the funny thing is?" Victoria said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I would have made your family richer than you could have imagined. I would have transformed your company into something magnificent. All you had to do was treat me with basic human respect. That's all. Just see me as a person worthy of dignity. But you couldn't even do that. She pushed open the doors and walked out, leaving behind chaos, leaving behind billions, leaving behind people who would spend the rest of their lives regretting this night. Her phone was already buzzing with messages from her team, confirming that the deal was dead, that the press release was out, that the business world was already reacting to the news. But Victoria didn't look at any of them. She walked through the hotel lobby, past the doorman who stared at her wine-soaked dress with concern, out into the cool night air. Her car was waiting, her driver James jumping out when he saw her condition. "Ms. Blackwell, what happened? Are you hurt?" She smiled at him, the first genuine smile she had given all evening. "No, James. I'm perfect. I'm absolutely perfect." As the car pulled away from the hotel, Victoria saw her reflection in the window, wine-stained, disheveled, and somehow more powerful than she had ever been in her life. The news broke like thunder across the financial world. "Blackwell Technologies withdraws from Whitmore deal," screamed the headlines. The stock market reacted instantly. Whitmore Industries lost 30% of its value in the first hour of trading. Investment firms that had bet on the merger scrambled to cut their losses. Christopher Whitmore held emergency board meetings that stretched through the night, trying to explain how a deal 2 years in the making had collapsed in 5 minutes because of his sister's actions. Patricia Whitmore became the most hated woman in business overnight. The video of her pouring wine on Victoria went viral, viewed 50 million times in the first week. She was banned from every major social event, shunned by family friends, disowned by board members who watched their portfolios burn because of her bigotry. She tried to apologize, releasing a statement that no one believed, making a donation to charity that everyone saw as an empty gesture. But it was too late. The damage was done, not just to her family's company but to their entire legacy. Meanwhile, Victoria Blackwell became a symbol of dignity in the face of discrimination. The video of her calm response, her measured words, her decisive action, inspired millions. Other companies rushed to partner with her, wanting to be on the right side of history. Her company's value doubled in 6 months. She was invited to speak at universities, at conferences, at gatherings of world leaders who wanted to understand how she had turned humiliation into triumph. But she turned most of them down. Victoria had never been interested in fame, only in building something that mattered. She hired more people from underrepresented backgrounds, funded scholarships for students who reminded her of herself, created programs to help other entrepreneurs who faced the same barriers she had overcome. A year later, Victoria stood in her office looking out at the city skyline. Her assistant knocked and entered, carrying a folder. "Ms. Blackwell, there's something you should see." It was a news article about Whitmore Industries filing for bankruptcy. The debt had finally caught up with them, the lost deal having started a domino effect they couldn't stop. Christopher Whitmore was quoted saying it was the biggest regret of his life, not standing up to his sister sooner, not protecting the partnership that could have saved them. Patricia Whitmore had disappeared from public life entirely, her trust fund frozen by legal battles, her friends gone, her future destroyed. By one moment of cruelty she could never take back. Victoria read the article without expression, then handed it back to her assistant. "Send Christopher Whitmore a message. Tell him I'm willing to buy the useful parts of his company. Fair market value. But I want Patricia's written apology, a real one, published in every major newspaper, admitting what she did and why. And I want her to do a year of community service in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in. Maybe she'll learn something." Her assistant looked surprised. "You're offering to help them? After what they did?" Victoria smiled, but it was a complicated smile, full of wisdom earned through pain. "I'm not helping them. I'm buying valuable assets at a discount. But I'm also showing them something they never showed me. Grace. The kind that comes from strength, not weakness. The kind that builds empires instead of destroying them." She turned back to the window, watching the sun set over the city she had conquered not with wine or humiliation but with dignity and determination. Besides, she added, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's succeeding so completely that they have to watch you save them. The deal went through 3 months later. Christopher Whitmore signed over the remnants of his family's empire to the woman his sister had tried to humiliate. Patricia published her apology, every word of it true, every word of it painful for her to write. She spent a year working in community centers, teaching computer skills to kids who looked at her with the same suspicion she had once shown to people like them. Some of them eventually forgave her. Most didn't. But she learned, slowly and painfully, what Victoria had always known. That dignity isn't something you're born with or something that can be washed away with wine. It's something you build, choice by choice, moment by moment, until it becomes so much a part of you that no one can take it away. Victoria never spoke publicly about that night at the gala again. She didn't need to. The story spoke for itself, retold in business schools and boardrooms as a cautionary tale about the price of prejudice and the power of dignity. But privately, she kept the golden dress, wine stains and all, hanging in her closet as a reminder. Not of her humiliation, but of her strength. Not of what she had lost, but of what she had proven. That a black woman from the wrong side of Chicago could stand in a room full of billionaires, have wine poured over her head by someone who thought she was nothing, and walk away more powerful than any of them. That was the night Victoria Blackwell proved that the title of her story, Black CEO Had Wine Poured Over Her by Billionaire's Sister, Then She Shut Down Their $2.4 billion contract, wasn't about revenge or destruction. It was about transformation, the kind that happens when someone tries to break you and discovers you're unbreakable. Years passed, and the story became legend in corporate circles. Young entrepreneurs, especially women of color, would approach Victoria at events and whisper, "You're the one from that night. The one who walked away from billions." And Victoria would smile and tell them the same thing every time. "I didn't walk away from billions. I walked towards something worth more. My self-respect. Never let anyone convince you that money is more valuable than that." She built her company into a global giant, but more importantly, she built a new model for how business could be done. With dignity. With respect. With the understanding that true power comes not from stepping on others but from lifting them up. And in her office, in a frame made of gold, she kept a single photo from that night. Not of the humiliation, not of the wine being poured, but of the moment she stood up, dripping but dignified, about to change the course of history with 5 words, "Kill the deal." All of it. That photo reminded her every day that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let anyone make you small. Patricia Whitmore learned that lesson too late, watching from the ruins of her family's empire as Victoria built something bigger and better from the ashes. Christopher Whitmore learned it as he signed away his heritage to the woman he should have defended. The entire business world learned it as they watched stock prices rise and fall based on values more than valuations. But Victoria had always known it, from the moment she started her first company in a borrowed garage, writing code while her neighbors laughed at her dreams. She knew that dignity was the only currency that really mattered, the only thing that couldn't be bought or sold or poured away like wine. The story ended where it began, in a ballroom full of wealthy people celebrating their success. But this time, it was Victoria's event, a fundraiser for her foundation that provided technology education to underprivileged youth. The room was just as glittering, the champagne just as expensive, but something was different. The crowd was diverse, filled with faces that reflected the world as it really was, not as a few privileged families thought it should be. Victoria stood at the podium, wearing another golden dress, this one unstained, and looked out at the assembled guests. She saw Christopher Whitmore at a back table, older now, humbled, grateful to have been invited. She saw former competitors who had become allies, former skeptics who had become believers. She even saw Patricia, standing by the door as if ready to flee, invited because Victoria believed in redemption even for those who didn't deserve it. Tonight, Victoria began, her voice strong and clear, we celebrate not just success but transformation. The transformation that happens when we stop seeing each other as threats and Start seeing each other as possibilities. When we stop pouring wine and start pouring resources into communities that need them. When we stop trying to humiliate each other and start trying to elevate each other. The room erupted in genuine applause, not the polite kind that had filled that other ballroom years ago, but real appreciation for real truth. Victoria raised her glass of water, she never drank wine anymore, and offered a toast. To dignity. To resilience. To the power that comes from knowing your worth and never letting anyone convince you otherwise. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed, Victoria made her way through the crowd, greeting guests, sharing laughs, building the future one connection at a time. When she passed Patricia, she stopped, just for a moment. The younger woman looked up at her with eyes full of shame and something else, maybe understanding, maybe growth. "Thank you for inviting me," Patricia whispered. "I didn't deserve it." Victoria studied her for a long moment, seeing not the cruel young woman from that night but someone who had been broken and was trying to rebuild. "No," Victoria agreed. "You didn't. But that's what grace looks like. It's giving people chances they haven't earned, hoping they'll become worthy of them." She moved on, leaving Patricia standing there with tears in her eyes, understanding finally what real power looked like. The evening continued, millions of dollars raised for the foundation, connections made that would change lives, the future being written by people who had once been excluded from the past. And through it all, Victoria moved with the same dignity she had shown that night when wine dripped from her chin and she refused to break. Because she had learned something that night that no business school could teach, no amount of money could buy. She had learned that when someone tries to pour shame on you, you can choose whether to wear it or wash it off. When someone tries to make you small, you can choose to stand tall instead. When someone offers you billions to accept disrespect, you can choose dignity instead and somehow end up with both. That was the true story behind the headline, "Black CEO had wine poured over her by billionaire's sister, then she shut down their $2.4 billion contract." It wasn't just about a business deal or a moment of cruelty. It was about the moment when Victoria Blackwell proved that dignity was the ultimate power, that respect was non-negotiable, and that sometimes the best response to someone trying to humiliate you was to show them what real strength looked like. The wine had long since been cleaned up, the stains had faded, but the lesson remained, written in bold letters across the history of American business. Never underestimate the power of a woman who knows her worth. Never mistake kindness for weakness. And never, ever pour wine on someone who has the power to pour your empire down the drain.